So it is my pleasure to introduce this year's Distinguished Alumni Award recipient, Mark van der Zalm, who is the founding principal of van der Zalm and Associates in Vancouver, British Columbia, in Canada. He has over 2 decades of working experience in Canada, the US, China, and Europe. Mark is recognized as a global leader in action sports facility design and citywide strategic planning for skateboarding and bike infrastructure. Pretty cool. Mark has presented on panels across North America advocating for greater appreciation of tactical recreation, which is a term I think we'll hear more about and I look forward to hearing about, and diversity in programming and support for youth culture, which is something we don't hear a lot about that's really cool, is designing for the youth, the people who are going to enjoy the design longer than anyone else. Since graduating from the LAEP department at USU in 1997, Mark has developed a practice that employs over 35 landscape architects, civil engineers, and urban forestry professionals. The firm has received national recognition and awards for public park design and planning. He served as the president of the British Columbia Society of Landscape Architects in 2010, overseeing the organization's 10-year strategic plan, a vision which was completed in 2012, I believe. Mark is president-elect of the Pacific Parkland Foundation, a charitable arm of Metro Vancouver Parks. He's also been a member of the LAEP Advancement Board and currently sits as a member of the Heritage Review Board for the township of Langley, his hometown. A few projects of note throughout Mark's career include the Yingkou waterfront design in Yingkou Prefecture, China, Highland Park in the city of Surrey, British Columbia, just east of Vancouver, I think. A skateboard master plan, that's a first for me, I hadn't heard of that, for the city of Arlington, Texas. And if you had told me that in middle school, I think I would have paid a lot more attention in class. And if I knew I could do that as a career, and done the B+MLA. The plaza at the Forks, which is among other things a skatable sculpture plaza at the junction of the Red and Assiniboine Rivers in Winnipeg, Manitoba. The City of Vancouver Green Stormwater Strategy. The Linköping Community Skate Park in Sweden. It's a city in Sweden. Another urban skateboarding strategy for the city of Cardiff in Wales. The White Rock Pier Plaza in BC. Rocky Point Waterfront Park in Port Moody, and the Northern Gateway Conceptual Master Plan. Mark is a proud father of 3 who might all be here, and one of whom who is in the USU Landscape Architecture program now. I also learned from his website that, quote, his selfie game is on point, and despite his birth year, he is a millennial at heart, which I can't wait to hear all about. But before we hear from him, we would like to formally recognize Mark's achievement. So I'll have Mark actually come stand up here with Keith, our department head. We have a couple gifts for you. In appreciation of the outstanding accomplishments of Mark van der Zalm, and with gratitude for his representing the best of the Department of Landscape Architecture and Environmental Planning, we, the students, the faculty and alumni of LAEP, recognize Mark as Distinguished Alumni of LAEP Class of 2022. Mark van der Zalm exemplifies the qualities and contributions of those we are so proud of as LAEP alumni. Thank you for representing LAEP so well. Give him a round of applause.
We're good to go. So before we get started, that selfie point thing brought up I do want to get a selfie with all of you. So if I could get you all in the background, just, there we go. There we go. Oh, there we go. Okay, perfect. You might end up on my website somewhere. But anyway, I just wanted to thank you and to say how, get rid of my gum, how humbled I am really to receive this award. It's just, I see friendly faces in the crowd, and I see people I know, and it's wonderful to see you all. And it's great to be back in Logan. I was saying to faculty last night and today, just how special this place is. I know when you're here, you're in the trenches, you're doing your thing, you're working hard, you're up late, you're trying to hit deadlines. It can be hard. It can be hard, but you know, really, the end result, this process of education that you're all going through, is going to shape you into some really formidable people, practicing professionals. And I've met many practicing USU graduates that are exceptional and indeed well followed by other colleagues in the profession. So you're in a good place, I'll say that, and I think I'll leave it at that. You've got a lot of hard work ahead of you. I saw you in the studios today, and it was really fun. I wish I had more time to do that and spend some time with you. I'm sorry I had to duck out, Patty. I disappeared halfway through your class, but it was really fun to see what you're working on, and I really enjoy that part of it. I'll start on this presentation, tell you a little bit about myself. Sam did a great job, and I am going to focus on action sports, recreation, and skateboarding in particular because I know it the best, but a lot of our firm's practice really looks at youth culture and looks at how we understand public space, not only in parks, but in semi-public, semi-private settings, in public municipal plazas, and how we understand vibrancy, inclusion, equity, those sorts of buzzwords out there that are tossed around a lot in architecture and landscape architecture right now, and really what we should be doing as practicing professionals and what the opportunities are. This is an exciting time to be in landscape architecture school. I feel like there's limitless opportunities for what you can do after you graduate. And you can do that in traditional practice of landscape architecture, or you can bend off and forge out your own sort of niche. And in a way, I've done some of that. I practice in the mainstream landscape architecture world. I won't deny that there's a good percentage of our work and the people who work in our office that are working on traditional landscape architecture projects and doing good work there. These are some of the fun things that we really like, and I thought it would be compelling to share with you and sort of introduce the opportunity so you can think about, hey, how it might influence where you go and maybe the way you think about some of your projects. About me, I graduated from USU in 1997. I returned home to Vancouver and worked in a private practice and then transferred to a public agency for a couple of years and started my own firm after that. For those of you who don't know, that's where Vancouver is. I know it seemed like a world away when I was in Logan and living here. They're like, you're from where? They just understood it was in Canada somewhere. And that's true. It is in Canada. It's West Coast. It's a fairly big city, similar to Seattle in scale. That's a shot of it. Our office, Seattle population and Vancouver population are very similar. It's the metroplex of Seattle that dwarfs Vancouver. Vancouver's about 4 million people or 2.2 million people in the Metroplex area with about 700,000 downtown. So that matches Seattle, but Seattle has about 4 million in their Metroplex, so they're a much bigger, sprawling city. So in our Vancouver office, we have two offices. I live in a small community outside of Vancouver called Fort Langley. It's a historic town. Lived there for many years, and so we have a small studio of 10 landscape architects there. And in Vancouver, we have another group, a larger group of urban designers, civil engineers, and landscape architects. We practice largely in the city and the greater Metro Vancouver area, but we also practice around the United States, and when opportunities come up, we'll go almost anywhere. We're up for adventure, essentially, and so if there's an opportunity for a good project somewhere, I'm game. So today I just want to talk to you about public space. This will be the meat of the presentation, and I just want you to consider how we define public space, how we consider certain spaces successful or unsuccessful, and then look at the opportunities for considering your role, our role as people who inhabit these spaces, in how we define these spaces through experience, and specifically action sports. So we'll go into that. Just to touch on a little bit of the philosophy here, there was a French sociologist and philosopher, Henri Lefebvre, who pioneered the idea of everyday life being important. And so how do you define the success of a space without really looking at the everyday usage. And he wrote a number of critiques through the 20th century on everyday life and that it shouldn't be disregarded. Of course, he lived in beautiful French cities, and so I think there was urban spaces designed on a scale of grandeur. And his critique was more about, what about all of us? What about people? Cities can be places of consumption and on commerce, but they're also places of experience, and that's important. If you're not involved in consumption or in commerce, you have a role to play in cities. You have a role to play in terms of your experience of place and how you bring vibrancy to public space. And so just as an example, in public spaces, they can be fairly simple, fairly unattractive, frankly. And so I think I got this backwards. There we go. So an empty sort of windswept place in Portland, Maine, cleaned up for a food truck festival or a swing dance lesson or a World Cup viewing party. The notion of this being a successful space, I'm sure we would argue that it potentially is not. However, the adaptation for impromptu events and activities, that experience of space is what brings this vibrancy and makes places successful. I wanted to touch on our role as citizens, and I guess, we get this sense that maybe sometimes we're powerless to change certain things, but the notion of citizenship is a Roman ideal, and it was revolutionary at the time that it was brought in, that you could be conveyed certain rights. Even if you were a conquered peoples, you could be conveyed certain rights and protections of the state. And all that was expected of you in return was that you would participate, that you would be an active member politically or at least socially in the activities of the state. And so that notion of citizenship, I think, is important, and I think we'll get back to it a little bit later. I want to tie it to Henri Lefebvre's idea of the critique of everyday life and our own responsibilities of being active members of society and how that can play into successful public spaces. So I'll focus specifically on experiences because places can be open, they can be beautiful, they can be aesthetically pleasing, they could be a collection of objects, but without people, they would be arguably unsuccessful. So you really want to understand what makes these places. If you took a picture of this space, 2 hours prior to a big event, it would be fairly large, maybe beautifully executed aesthetically, but it's the life that's brought on and the vibrancy of people that really create successful public spaces. And I'm sure all of you can think of spaces you've been to that feel interesting. Maybe there's a certain tension in them. Maybe there's a sense of danger somewhat. They're in maybe an emerging area of town. You're sort of a little uncomfortable to be there, but you want to be there because there's a musical act playing there and you want to be part of it. All of these things, these tensions, create this environment of vibrancy. So I wanted to touch on people's perspectives because I think perspectives are big in terms of what is acceptable in public space and how we utilize public space. And as designers or potential future designers, we want to think about things from perspectives of the end user, of people who will enjoy the ultimate result of our hard work. There's a lot of places that aren't really understood for who the designer was. There's some beautiful places. Us as landscape architects and urban design professionals, if there's a beautiful place that's been done by James Corner, or West 8's been involved with Governor's Island, or you have Snøhetta Design. You have these big firms that really have some beautiful work, Thomas Balsey's work. But the general public really don't know, and nor do they care. They just really want to feel how they feel in a space and sort of go, this is cool, this is nice, I like this, I feel good here, I want to be here, I want to visit here, I want to run an event here. So in terms of perspective, I was listening to a podcast, it was a skateboarding perspective in terms of what is a bench in terms of perspective. And this is really interesting because a bench is intended for sitting, and many public or semi-public spaces in cities, perhaps a plaza at the base of a bank downtown, is meant for people who are engaging in commerce to move through, to maybe eat their lunch, maybe check their email, but it's not necessarily meant for a bunch of potentially disruptive behavior. So those are semi-public spaces, but this happens every day. You've seen this, might happen in Logan. This happens certainly in many cities where you have people sitting in the intended use of that bench, performance happening, maybe an impromptu little musical act breaking out, exercise and stretching. It could be somebody's spare bedroom, or it could be used for recreation. Parkour, it could be seen as an object to be jumped. I don't have a skateboarding example here, but there's many. Or a place of commerce. So perspective is important. Tactical urbanism, by show of hands, is everyone familiar with the term tactical urbanism or been exposed to that? It's an idea of sort of do-it-yourself culture, of changing a public space for a usage to either send a message about what would be appropriate here, or to simply create some place that's better than what it currently is. And it's lean, cheap, quick. The idea is to modify your environment. You're not asking for permission. You're maybe spray painting something in the street. There's various levels of tactical urbanism, and there's a lot of different successful examples. Here's a few where, a pop-up event with a bunch of pallets, some tents, and a place, for people to meet at this public library. This is an alley in Vancouver. Doesn't look very hospitable. Lots of infrastructure for electrical. The odor in this alley is not something that you'd really want to wish on your worst enemy. It's not a great place, but it was transformed by a group of architects, actually. It's too bad that landscape architects weren't invited to the party. This was done by HCMA architects in Vancouver, and they just installed some beautiful adornments, invited people out, had this sort of really vibrant environment created with paint. It's cheap, it was quickly done, but people started to visit, and it created a whole program about livable laneways in Vancouver. Here's an example from Salt Lake City, this intersection improvement. I saw this online, I thought it was really interesting. These sorts of examples of tactical urbanism, which are cheap and inexpensive, in a way they test new ideas where you can try something. Let's give it a try. Let's try and paint out the intersection so it's safe to turn your bicycle at this corner, and a car who ventures over in here might feel a little uncomfortable. Let's see what happens. And so these little interventions are things that have been gaining momentum and have been getting support from local government. There's a lot of progressive planning departments that have been looking at these things and saying, you know what, if we just gave that community group maybe a few $100, what could they do? Maybe we could just try something for a weekend. Let's close a street. Let's do something different. So as the money gets invested and as various government agencies get involved, the interventions become more significant. It doesn't mean that any of these small interventions aren't important. They really are, and they're helpful. Maybe some of you are familiar with the whole Park It movement, or the Park It program that originated in San Francisco, which was basically sort of a play on words about getting cars out of the pedestrian environment and changing parking stalls into unique little urban parklets. And that came right out of this movement of tactical urbanism. So what about recreation? I started to feel like, this tactical urbanism, it's an interesting movement. It's something we see in marginalized recreational groups like skateboarders, parkour, aggressive inline skating, or flat ground BMX or freestyle BMX. A lot of that happens in public space. There's not a lot of parks that critically support that type of recreation. There are some, but there's a lot of communities that don't have a sanctioned facility. So a lot of sort of offside or marginalized recreation happens in the streets. So From the point of view, this is going back to that livable laneways movement and looking at other things besides action sports, something as mainstream as basketball, but why can't that happen in an underutilized space? Again, that's not an official key. I can vouch for that, but it's still, there's no three-point line in here, but you can still play in this alley and it's still fun, and it's fun because of where you are. You're in an urban space in a sort of edgy condition, and you're recreating in a sort of laneway. It's fun. So looking at it from the point of view of do-it-yourself, guerrilla modification of urban environments for tactical recreation, things like skateboarding, things like BMX, scooters, which is actually the fastest growing area of action sports right now in America, which is amazing. A lot of the park design we're working on now has to be modified to support these long-decked scooters because they're a chromoly frame and they grind over concrete in a different way than skateboarding does, and they really degrade surfaces. So there's a whole new movement in you can't just put scooters in skate parks because they'll destroy it. Anyway, it happens. Aggressive inline or parkour. So if you're familiar with any of these, they're smaller groups of people. There may be people who aren't completely comfortable joining a team. Maybe they weren't into team sports in high school, but there's a big growing group of people that are really into action sports. It's growing, and these people get many of the same benefits that team sports convey in what they do. They hang out with a community of people, they get together, they meet. No question it's an athletic endeavor. So tactical recreation thinks about how can we modify small spaces and do it with some support from municipal government to change a space and make it more successful. This is a space under the Burrard Street Bridge in Vancouver. The idea of adding 2 small quarter pipes, maybe an interesting sort of wedge feature for skateboarding on a brick surface, certainly not ideal, but something that would animate this space, make people feel safer, because without this activity, there's all sorts of other things going on in this space. Another interesting part of tactical recreation that popped out to me over the last 20 years or so, I've been working with skateboarders and action sports practitioners in various different sports, but skateboarding in particular, always blown away. How many of you are taking the construction class right now? So you're getting into detailing, grading and drainage. Is that all part of it? So your perspective has changed forever. I took that class here with Professor Ellsworth back in the day and did some long-term damage, but I survived it. And I never looked at a city street the same way after that. I was always observing the step-up curb, the drop-off, the way water would flow on a hard surface. It's just, you can't not see it anymore. So it's really funny. And I know any of you who are doing that sort of work just cannot not see that anymore. So it's kind of unique from a skateboarder's perspective. If you drive around a big city with a seasoned skateboarder, it's always a practice of stop, stop, stop. Back up, stop, just turn here. And it's always to look at some really innocuous, simple loading dock or a 3-set or a long curb or something with the perfect run up or run out. And it's crazy. It's really, I was driving around Toronto probably 20 years ago with a guy named Ariel Stagney. He now works for the city of Toronto. He was a professional skateboarder at the time. And he was pointing out, and we were at probably 90 feet away from this obstacle. He goes, that's a perfect 3-set with a round rail that I can get on from that loading dock. He goes, I'm coming back for that. I'm like, okay, And so I thought, that's amazing. What kind of average person sees the city that way? You as landscape architects are going to start to see it that way, and you won't be able to unsee it. But the fact that there's somebody in a recreational user group that understands the dimensions of that feature, the look, the run up, the run out, the texture, the fact that he could possibly gap it from this loading dock is something really unique. And so this was created by one of the skateboarders that works for us. I said, Nathan, how many ways do you see this set of stairs? And so he diagrammed all of these different tricks that could be done that on this stair set, which is simple ollie or gap over the rail or 50-50 on this rail or up and over, or riding it in the up direction. So this is the perspective of a action sports enthusiast that knows who's pretty proficient at their sport. It's a different perspective. So tactical recreation can include all sorts of things. It's not just skateboarding, but I'm looking at, freestyle fixed gear bikes, longboard dancing. Is that something that ever comes into your psyche? But I met a big group of these women who do longboard dancing in Seattle, and it was a part of the user group engagement on the new Seattle Center Skate Plaza that we finished just recently. Roller skating making a huge comeback right now. Roller derby being a big thing, but roller skating in general coming back. Buildering, Sean, ring a bell? So there's that urban climbing, that sort of illegal climbing of buildings and other things. After hours happens in the urban environment. Breakdancing making a comeback. So all of these things are really unique. They're fun to watch. And I bet you if we were walking down Venice Beach, and because you expect it in Venice, it's a crazy place. People are weightlifting, they're singing, they're doing all sorts of stuff. You go, oh, that's cool at Venice. Do I want that in Logan? I know it's a big step. Like you're thinking, I don't know if I'm ready for that. But maybe we're ready for some baby steps here. And I throw that out here because very low barriers. If you want to get into skateboarding, it's a very low barrier to get in. You can buy a board. You can get somebody to help you out. The skateboarding community is amazing in terms of support. Go to your local shop and they'll help you with grip tape, getting wheels. They'll set you up and set you straight. In fact, there's a lot of people who will give you a board. So minimal equipment, it's creative and adaptive. It creates an incredibly strong social connection. In a lot of the cities where I work and we engage with young people and not so young people, the biggest thing they get out of action sports or skateboarding in particular is a social connection, a sense of belonging. And it goes back to that notion of citizenship. Do you belong to your community? Do you belong to the spaces that you inhabit? And I would say that in spades, the people I've met that might be considered somewhat marginalized are very socially aware and involved. Great mental health and physical health support. So that contributes to a healthy and resilient city. Who participates in this type of recreation? Well, it used to be a lot of young males. That was the truth. When I got into consulting with communities after graduation, it was a lot of young dudes in a room. There would be very few females there. That has completely changed, and it's really awesome to see, specifically in big urban centers, but it's really bringing a lot of balance and health to this community. It really feels more comfortable. There's a lot of women coming out and telling us what they want in a park and how they want parks to be designed because they feel safe in a certain way and maybe less safe or more intimidated in a different way. So perspectives are important. So we're seeing more females getting involved in action sports, and we're also seeing a lot more older people. The curve is bending here. The room is full of people that kind of look more like me. That happens in sort of evolved, I would say, action sports cities like in Oregon, in Washington State, or in Vancouver, where you have a surf culture as well. And so you have an older group of action sports enthusiasts, and they're really articulate. They're quite educated, and they can tell, and they're quite active, and they're quite often own a lot of the local businesses, so they're influential. So we do tend to get a lot more traction these days. What I used to be working with a very small group, we'd be in a room with a size this big of really active, passionate stakeholders. The rooms are more like this now. We got to run 3 or 4 nights of people who are interested in it. It's no longer just, can we get this, and we got to fight for it, and it's us against the world. It's really about, okay, well, how big, where does it need to be, how do we make it safe? We're having more reasonable conversations about action sports that is more in line with a regular recreation facility. So, The spaces that action sports inhabit, we've seen it. Loading docks, skate parks, city center parks, downtown street spots. It's all over. But there's a thought process that we're starting to push a little bit further. A friend of mine, Tony Bricali from Friday Architecture in Philadelphia, he started this sort of notion of skateboarding outside of parks, and why isn't it something that is supported by municipalities? Well, the answer there is fairly obvious. People don't feel safe. It's a conflict zone between different user groups. So how do we get around that? Love Plaza in Philadelphia, much loved public space. You know the sculpture, the Love sculpture. You've probably all seen it. It's a mecca for skateboarding. And so that plaza was what drove Tony Bricali. He's a prof at Driscoll. And he drove the whole creation of Franklin's Payne's Plaza in Philadelphia that mimicked all of the Love skate features and created a sort of an alternate universe after they redeveloped Love Plaza. So it was interesting. He came to visit us in Vancouver, and we were working on a project that was temporary for the city of Vancouver called the Downtown Plaza. And it was taking a parking lot under 2 viaducts and turning it into a public space for performance, but for skateboarding and BMX. And it was supposed to be a 2-year pilot project. So it's still there today. It was hugely successful. Tony came out and viewed that and took that idea back to Philly and brought that into their project at downtown. So we're very proud of that collaboration. But the idea is to try and get skateboarding in a legitimate way to animate and create vibrancy in public spaces, but do it in a way that's acceptable to the vast majority of other stakeholders. So this is a photo that was sent to us from a user group in Cardiff, Wales. We're doing a master plan for their downtown skate strategy right now. Very different than where we would be working in North America. This city is incredibly tight, somewhat medieval. There's a lot of really beautiful public space, but very symmetrical and really traditional. But there's a really healthy skate community there that loves to skate heritage spaces, which is obviously an issue. And it's something that the council there has asked us to get involved with, engaging with this group to try and find out how we can either modify some of those spaces to make them skate friendly and still be safe for others, but perhaps build some other infrastructure that is attractive to this group and maybe draw them out of downtown or draw them away from some spaces. So we're seeing how that goes. But essentially the reaction to tactical recreation in public space has been defensive. It's really been prohibition. And that's really tough. You know, when you put youth in conflict with security guards or bylaw enforcement officers or local police, it's just not a great start in life. And if you do that 2 or 3 times and you end up getting a criminal record for what you're doing is really recreation in a public space, it's a really tough way to interact with authority. And it doesn't really breed, healthy communities. So we got to look at other ways to do it. Here's a few examples. This is Pier 7 in San Francisco. This ledge, which is I'll speak metric for a minute, 30 centimeters tall by about 3.5 meters long. It is a granite ledge. It's perfect. It's replicated in almost every skate park around the world. I don't know if there's one of these in Hiram down the road. We were talking about this, Ryan, but this little obstacle is replicated in almost every project we do because it's what kids see. It's what they see in magazines. It's what they see their heroes skating. So that Pier 7 manual pad, this is what San Francisco did with that, right? So the reaction is prohibited. They have since uncapped this. They realize how important it is, and not only to tourism in San Francisco, but just to their own skate community. But that is capping, providing a little granite cap, stop that. This is the CIBC Bank, Canadian Imperial Bank of Commerce, one of the largest banks in Canada. It's downtown Vancouver, has this perfect chrome round rail over a 6 set, a really delicate 6 set, so it's easy to skate. It looks really good in photographs, right? You've got You can get a photo doing this trick. It looks really gnarly. You look like a hero, but it's a really shallow elevation change. So it's super popular, obviously. So this is what they did to the CIBC. That killed that one. This is China Banks in San Francisco as well, and they're capped. This guy's found a way to skate it anyway. So this is what happens is these objects get recreated in make-believe in public parks to be used, which is really a great, this is a tear down temporary event for Do Tour, street league skateboarding. And so to reproduce this obstacle, you can only imagine what that costs. But this is what people want to do. This is where they want to skate. This is what they want to engage with. So we're recreating real-life urban design, putting it in parks so that people can actually utilize it, which is interesting and effective. And it's something, that provides a safe environment for people to utilize so that they're not in conflict with security guards and they're not going to run into a car. So these are good things. And so this is one of the examples I wanted to share with you. This is Topaz Park. We opened this summer in Victoria, British Columbia. So it's a very large facility. But the idea, and the reason I'm showing this to you, is that same movement of bringing street culture into a sanctioned skate park. So the idea here is, big obstacle, hybrid, separate bowl area, and then a street flow space right down the middle. This was supposed to be a much more dramatic street space. It got trimmed back by, for various reasons. There was budget, there was concern about adding street trees because of maintenance and things like that. That really would have sold that as a street, so it was very unfortunate. But this is what we ended up with. But we replicated these obstacles. So there's the Carlsbad Gap. So that's a pretty nothing feature, but it's a huge destination for skateboarders on the West Coast and around the United States to be able to gap over that piece of grass and to get a photograph on it. So it's replicated in this park. There's the China Bank ledge. Here's, these are, amoeba-shaped pools with tile. So we started building swimming pools for skateboarding a number of years ago. We'd put in the scupper drains, we'd put in the stair set in them, we'd put a rail in the middle. Kind of unsafe. We pulled back from doing that a little bit. They looked really authentic, but there were some injuries. So we stopped doing that. We do have liability insurance, but there are some limitations. So anyway, this was the idea of putting it into a park and having these unique spots that we could actually, create that sort of drama of a street environment. This is Seattle Center. So Seaskate, City of Seattle is on the 5th version of Seaskate. And Climate Pledge Arena was built to house the new Kraken hockey team for the NHL and hopefully an NBA franchise again there eventually, bring back the Sonics. But in building the Climate Pledge Arena, they had to demolish the skate park that we built for them a decade ago. And it was a street-style skate park. What was interesting about this is we had a conversation with Seattle about actually putting this park into a street. And that was fairly revolutionary because the culture of skateboarding is very tied to street culture. And through the 90s and the early 2000s, that was where skateboarding took place. A lot of parks were demolished for the optics of being too unsafe. And so skateboarding went back into the streets. And it'll always remain there to a certain extent. There'll always be skateboarding. There'll always be parkour. There'll always be flat ground BMX in streets because it's interesting terrain. It's just part of the culture. And so we thought, could we work with the Broad Street Green? Broad Street Green is a beautiful, right at the base of the Space Needle. You can see it there. Anybody's visited Seattle. Broad Street is a diagonal street that cuts across the city. And there was this closed portion that we petitioned transportation and engineering to get. And we were able to get it. And we turned it into a skate plaza, very low level, very technical, so that beginners could use it. That there's an organization called Skate Like a Girl that's based in Seattle that runs camps for girls and young kids of all genders. And And this is really their training facility, very low level, very tech. But if you came here as a professional, you would do some different technical tricks on the same terrain. It doesn't mean you can't use it because it's low in tech. You can, you just do different things. So I'd argue here that we're changing, or we're hoping to move from a defensive architecture and prohibition to something that engages with user groups. This is the opportunity for you guys. So this is something that that is starting to happen. We're seeing a willingness from municipal governments, from people in authority to engage more. And it's really working well. It takes longer. It's not easy. And you sometimes have to go to extraordinary measures to reach the right crowd. But that sort of engagement creates new perspectives on public space and ownership over public space. So these are getting a little graphy here, so I'll blow over them here. But you can see that conventional responses are being rethought, and opportunistic thinking about how to possibly allow for tactile recreation to occur. So this is a challenge, especially when you're dealing with a user group that likes to define their own terrain. If you create a sanctioned spot in a city, does it really have credibility as a street spot, or is it just a park and a sanctioned facility out in the street? So there's a lot of discussion about how you can just design space to support a lot of impromptu activities, whether that be parkour or be Tai Chi on a Sunday, or it be skateboarding. Could you support it through the design of that space with the right dimensions, with the right placement of obstacles, with the right inclusion of art, to make it interesting and vibrant and useful to a variety of different people from different perspectives? And we're arguing that can be done, and in fact it results in some really effective public spaces, because as Henri Lefebvre said, who are we to say that it's a successful space? All of you will tell us how successful those public spaces are. We'll go into spaces that we just love in the design studio, that we think are just amazing. And if there's nobody there, it's a real crusher. It's like, what's going on? Why don't you love it like we love it? Well, what did we miss? So really engaging with people to find out what it is that's important to them so that we can cohabit the same terrain. So looking beyond skate parks, this is the challenge, to take things out into the street. And I just wanted to highlight this because it's something Sam mentioned here. It is kind of, a citywide skate strategy, not something that a lot of cities do. But going back to the slide that I showed you, if you don't plan for skate parks, your whole city is a skate park, is essentially true. And then you get into that prohibition and sort of conflict sort of model. And so City of Vancouver is outlawed skateboarding and had a bylaw against skateboarding, and it was crazy. But I think in about 2000 they said skateboarding is legal again, and the mayor tossed out a bunch of skateboards at City Hall and said, "Hey, come skateboard." They realized that they had banned skateboarding from a lot of areas that nobody wanted to go, and those areas became really riddled with crime and lots of antisocial activity that was just degrading the quality of life in downtown environments. And so they actually went back and uncapped a lot of places like CIBC, or there's another famous spot in Vancouver called the Hot Spot, which is really a bench on a viaduct. But they uncapped the Hot Spot and crime went down. And essentially in the Vancouver Skate Plaza, which was a parking lot, if you can imagine, average cost of parking for an hour in Vancouver is a gazillion dollars. It's stupid. This parking lot was like $1.50 an hour. Nobody wanted to park there. It was like a wasteland. So they gave it to us for a skate park. But crime, mostly drug dealing, prostitution, the numbers just plummeted after we brought in recreation to take over this space. And it's funny, homelessness remained. That wasn't the problem. It just cohabited in the spaces we had. The problems was the drug dealing and the prostitution in these spaces. So Vancouver City Skate was something they called us in to look at skateboarding, not only from how many parks do we need, what kind of configuration do we need shelters? It rains a lot in Vancouver. It's like Seattle. And from our point of view, we ventured this notion of skateboarding outside of parks. And we really thought, how can we get other departments to come on board? The engineering department, transportation. Really, those two are the biggest obstacles because they don't like change. They like their concrete. They like things to be as per the standard. So Vancouver City Skate was that effort. We just completed that master plan this summer. So this is the skate plaza. This used to be that parking lot I was telling you about. Big hydroelectric substation and this big, basically drug dealing alley right down here, and back here is Maine. Just a kind of a really gritty area of town. And so this was all temporary. We did it all in concrete, but it was all a temporary installation. We salvaged a bunch of pieces from Slam City Jam, which was a Vans skateboarding tour that wasn't coming to Vancouver anymore, and we used some of those obstacles in here. Anyway, I just thought I'd show you that image. It's not an unappealing urban space, certainly much more interesting than the parking lot that used to be there. And this place is jammed. It's really a focus of Vancouver tourism, and there's a lot of people that use it as regular community members. Through our process at City Skate, we spent a year and a half engaging with the public. You imagine, like, that is the new norm for big, difficult projects, is consultation. And this process was supposed to take 6 to 8 months out of our timeline, and it turned into well over a year in terms of engaging with all of the right communities, making sure everybody was heard, making sure we could get into various geographies of the city, talk to young people, old people, boys, girls, First Nations, Native Americans, non-binary groups. It was just a huge effort at trying to let people be heard and to feel out, hey, what can we do for getting animation in some of these marginalized areas of the city. It was an interesting effort. In and of itself, the best events we ran were the ones that had entertainment, or we brought a big mini ramp out, or we brought a band. Who wouldn't want to come to something like that? We kind of played into youth culture. We started a podcast and had a panel discussion every quarter to talk about another issue related to skateboarding and either face some of those issues head on and bring on some various professionals and people who would speak for or against. It was great. Here's one of those panels here. This is Kirsten. She's from Skate Like a Girl in Seattle. She came up to sort of mediate this session, and these are local people, professional skateboarder. This is Nation Skate, Annie from Nation Skate, which is a big group of Native American skateboarders. So really interesting to tap into these groups and listen and see their perspectives. We had an ongoing dialogue through video online that we were posting about skateboarding, what it was, what's the history of skateboarding, trying to get down, because it was very, we're probably going to propose a skate park in a part of the city that is going to be a little close to somebody's house, and we're probably going to mix it up at a public event. So we wanted to really educate. So that year was about educating the public, letting them know what it was, what it wasn't, who the people were behind it, what different communities were involved. We went through a whole series of analysis. So I won't bore you with too much of this stuff, but I know Brent would enjoy this because he's a mapping guy. But I thought GIS was incredibly helpful in this type of study. We went through the City of Vancouver, just boatloads of data that they could just sort of give you, and you could just sort of look at various things and growth plans and overlay all sorts of quick data, sort of try and find gaps in where amenities were, and look at equity and how recreation is dispersed around the city and where the gaps are. And there really are some underserved areas of the city. I don't know exactly what we're looking at here, but skatable spaces versus places where people go because they just like it. So we tried to map those all out, tried to understand prioritizing locations for new facilities, and then looking at areas that were inside and outside of parks. We also created something called the toolkit, which was something that we could hand to the engineering department or to a developer who was creating an amenity with a new tower building or something like that. Why not create a skate park? It was never considered by a new development to create something for action sports. We would give them a toolkit. We'd tell them how much space you need, how much run-up is good, how much separation you should have, just a bunch of general information, how it ties into city policy, how you could plan, how you could go through a design RFP to hire a professional. And this became an appendices to the report that City of Vancouver now has as one of their guiding strategies for the city. Tons of these guidelines are so difficult, as you can probably imagine. It's complicated, right? The hip bone's connected to the leg bone, and everything has a knock-on effect. There's a lot of people affected by any new master planning work. And so there was a lot of discussion, a lot of debate, but it was very fruitful, very interesting discussion, and very invigorating to be a part of. At the end of it, I'm going to wrap it up here, but what we determined was we could roll out the strategy over 4 budget cycles. It was going to be about $22 million to do it, and we got unanimous approval. And that was pretty interesting, considering the Parks Board is a separate elected body in Vancouver. It's not municipal government, it's a separate body, and they are lobbied, they're political individuals. And we as a consulting team didn't speak to anyone. Any of them. We didn't lobby them. We didn't do anything like that. We just presented at key intervals, and we brought a manageable bite-sized plan out. Upgrade existing facilities, but always with an eye on being opportunistic with spots and dots. Look at other projects in the city. I was in your studios this afternoon, and there's the site analysis. You're looking for crossover and connections to different groups and what they're doing. That's what we want to do. There's so many things going on in the city. Why can't we tag along? Why can't we be a part of creating an opportunity for parkour or for skateboarding in this other project you're working on? And so that became part of the strategy, and simply writing it into the strategy gives horsepower and gasoline, I guess, to city staff to be able to go across the studio and say, hey, we've got a citywide guiding policy that says we should be doing this. So we're waiting to see how that rolls out. The first RFP hit the streets a couple of weeks ago, which includes a lot of this. It's quite interesting. A lot of upgrading of city greenways and looking at how we can introduce opportunities for stunting. That was the term that the bylaw used when it outlawed stunting for parkour or skateboarding or BMX in the city. And now we're looking for opportunities for stunting. So along the city greenways, we're building little dots and spots, things where they might look like public art, but you can also skate them, you could do a hand plant on them, you can do a number of different things with them, and it creates interest. If you're going to work downtown and you get there from your skateboard in the Kensington neighborhood and you want to run south downtown, you could swing off and do a trick on that bench that's supposed to be sat on, but you could actually use it for recreation, then get back on the trail and head downtown. And that's what we were told through the engagement piece. There were people my age telling me, yeah, I get up a little earlier so that I can spend 15, 20 minutes on my way to work, and I can hit the Kensington skate park for 10 minutes, and then I get back on my skate and I head to work. One of those guys was the senior city planner for the city of Vancouver. So where do we go from here? I think that whole process was fun. It was draining. It was difficult. It's complicated. And I think those are the types of things that we should all be interested in. This sort of, they're not easy. They take a lot of dialogue, but we as landscape architects and as students in landscape architecture are going to be well equipped to have those conversations. And it's really nice that we're having those conversations and we're leading these processes and we're including the other disciplines and departments that are affected. So I would say that we just want to have the opportunity and I guess the perspective that is a little bit wider, a little broader, embrace some new interpretations of spaces, be open to it. I think sometimes this happens a lot to me in Texas because I love going to Texas. I love the food. I love the people. But there's a lot of really traditional public space in Texas. And I go through there and I go, man, they all went to the same school. Like what's going on here? Let's get some new interpretations there. And this isn't a knock on A&M, Sean. Now, I know. You're sitting right there. You're sitting right there. No, I love Texas. That's why I said that. But I wanted to say, hey, be open to other opportunities, other interpretations of public space, and push that envelope a little bit. Be bold. Because it seems like the excitement and vibrancy in cities comes when designers like yourselves are bold. Thank you. Can I make it? Okay. Okay.
Any questions anyone wants to ask? Just raise your hand. Who's your favorite skater?
My favorite skater.
Well, I bring it over.
Well, they're probably not that well known. They're people that have helped me, you know. They're probably that. But I love Tony Hawk. I know that's a cop-out, but Tony Hawk is a great human being and a very philanthropic individual. So,
yeah.
Yeah.
Wonderful presentation, Mark. You know, you mentioned detailing and grading and those sorts of things. And I'm wondering, you know, in terms of the materials you use, are they special in some ways because of the scooters and the boards and the wear and tear? Could you talk a little bit about that?
Materiality in skate parks is really interesting. You would think, Dave, that really smoother the better. And that it's not just about smoothness, but the act of skateboarding or BMX is really tactile. Like the participants get their reading from the ground surface, much like a climber would. You feel the surface. So a lot of really interesting surfaces, like putting tile at the top of that bowl, you'd say, well, why would you do that? Well, because your wheels click over top of that tile and it makes a cool sound. And then when you hit the coping on top, you can grind on steel, and that's a different feel. So there's a different feeling from hitting tile to hitting a steel coping, or on flat ground if you changed it to. Some of the most popular public skate spaces are in Barcelona because their public plazas are made from granite. They're smooth, but they do have a little click sound to it, so it's subtle. It's subtlety. The materials are subtle. And when you can introduce something that's cool with color or a subtlety of material, it's very, very very pleasing. A lot of skateboarders tell us they love certain interventions we make in design. If we'll score a piece of concrete, so there's a little bit of a, you know, when you run up a board. We did this reggae artist had died in this community where we designed a park, and we took an album, a Whalers album, and bent it and put all the grooves in it. And so when you skate that album, you get that sort of and it's kind of making music, right? So skaters really appreciate materiality and texture, and so that's really kind of the fun part of it. Yeah.
Do I see another hand over here?
So something that I guess I've looked at a lot within the Intermountain West is the homeless populations and the homeless communities. In Salt Lake City, that's a big thing we have to consider. So what are the considerations you make in designing, knowing that homeless populations, homeless communities are going to be interacting with these spaces as well, and how you kind of mitigate the public perception of that and also design for these people as a part of the community?
Yeah, that's a really tough one, you know, and it's more and more, especially in West Coast temperate clients where homeless people migrate, like where I live. In the rest of Canada can be buried in snow, and Vancouver's fairly temperate. So we get a big homeless community, transient. We are asked to really look at, we displace people if we take over. That's the conversation. So there's a lot of conversations right now. I showed that little image of an intervention, a do-it-yourself intervention under a bridge. Well, that's a perfect covered space for tents and homeless people, and that's what it is currently. So we were designing an intervention for skateboarding, but keeping a lot of flat open space, making sure that there were still places to sleep, that there was flat areas so that it wasn't exclusive, but that at certain times of the day, it was going to be used for recreation. So in Seattle, that's a big issue as well, and there was a lot of concern about it. Sort of the same idea that it would be occupied when it was busy and programmed, and that it would be supporting flat spaces and cover. But there's a big argument for covered space, right, for all people, and action sports is no different. It happens outside, and they want to be out of the rain. If you get your shoes wet walking across the lawn to a skate park, it's kind of death on a skate park, because your shoes are flat and you'll skid and you'll hurt yourself. So you want to be dry, and so covered space is important. There was a big concern in that we put a skate park, the first covered skate park in British Columbia, into a really difficult neighborhood, methadone clinic, lots of homeless people, and we put a roof on it. And so the big concern was it was just going to be a campground, and and that never happened. What happened was the skate community came in and used it, and they were pretty respectful of other people who were actually sleeping there at night, and then it turned back into a skate facility. So, I guess I would say I don't think that, I'm not naive enough to say that would happen in every case, but I would say also that you don't completely write off a covered space for skateboarding, thinking that you're completely concerned about it being populated by homeless people. The two can coexist. I've seen it myself. So it's many urban skateboarders might have been homeless at one time. It's not a crazy notion. And I do talk to a lot of kids that skateboard that said skateboarding saved their lives, got them into a different sort of headspace, and that they were homeless at one time. So it's something that, we have to be concerned about. We engage. When we do public engagement, we actually go to spaces where there are homeless people. They don't always want to talk to us. We just have to be there ready to listen. That's what we do.
Question about the engagement timeline. So you said that in one of the projects, your budgeted timeline was about 6 months, and it almost doubled.
Yeah.
How does that happen? Like, what decisions led to that, and how do you convince the people who are paying you to let you spend that much more time on?
Yeah, great question. It's a really, when you start a process like this, and there's a lot of passion for the subject matter, timeline's kind of, it is what it is, but I'm a business person as well. I run a firm. I have to pay the people that are going to these meetings. I hope some of them are watching on the streaming section here, because there's a lot of talented people that help me with this. Shout out to Nate Ross. We go the extra mile when we have to. There has to be conversations. It's obvious. It's for the betterment of the project if we have the time. In this specific case, Vancouver City Skate, it was more important to get it right than to do it fast. And so we just kept going. And Vancouver was supportive, and they came back. They met us halfway. Like, we were way over on hours. We were just plowing hundreds of hours a month into this. So, we had a team of Nathan, Natasha, Travis, myself, Dave, Chris Ray. I'm thinking of the group in our office that worked on this weekly, and everybody wanted to work on it, so the hours kind of got going. We killed the budget. It worked out okay in the end. Like I said, Vancouver came to the table and said, we understand, we can do this. So the timeline wasn't a problem from the public's point of view. They just didn't know any better. But when it does become an issue, people get impatient. We have to have, it's like your land use planning class, Carolyn, we were talking, you have to have the end vision sort of identified. We want to get to here. I can see myself presenting to the Parks Board. I want that night to happen. How do I get there? And I'm trying to drive the engagement process and try and keep it quarterly, try to keep real progress happening on a quarterly calendar with milestones so that we're moving towards that end date. It's difficult. Sometimes we're herding cats. It's really difficult. Yeah, but it is. And some clients are better than others, but this engagement thing for a difficult process and project was acceptable, I would say, even though it took way too long. Yeah.
We have time for one more.
I just wanted to ask if you could talk a little more about just the impact of like electrified skateboards and one wheels and scooter and all that stuff on what you're doing. It seems like it's a different entry point for a different user group, and how you're dealing with perhaps that.
Yeah, that's really interesting. A lot of it's unknown, Keith, at this point. It falls into transportation for the most part. So we, with the greenway system in Vancouver, we've identified a number of greenways that allow electrified vehicles, skateboards, scooters, etc., bikes, runners, joggers, strollers, skateboarders. So we're all in that group right now, and it's almost like a massive beta test. You know, we're going to see how that interaction goes. What I've found with a lot of people engage in action sports is they're really spatially aware. They really understand, you know, how much space they need to do something safely. And so there's a lot of respect and space given to people. What I'm concerned about is that you're not necessarily from that community when you jump on a motorized scooter. It's just a cool way to get around. So you're now introducing a faster moving, heavier vehicle into a space that maybe is being used by pedestrians. And it was one of the biggest issues with bikes using skate terrain, because bikes are bigger, quieter, they have pegs, they can do more damage. And so if you collide between a bike and a skateboarder, we know who's winning that battle. The skateboarder's going to crumple. So that's in a park environment. I haven't seen a lot of electrified vehicles. I haven't seen that happening. But in a transportation environment, we're seeing more of it. And I guess the jury's out right now to see how they coexist and how it happens. But not seeing that a lot in parks, personally, right now. Yeah.
Let's give it up one more time for Mark. Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much.